Just give me 1 minute because I do see a couple people have joined the waiting room here. All right. I don't want to leave people out of the room. So I'm going to, here we go. I've got the screen. I can admit people as they come in. Thank you for your patience. So this is me. I'm the editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. I'm also of counsel at the ComLaw Group, a law firm that deals with telecommunications issues. And I should note the disclaimer that nothing in this presentation constitutes the creation of attorney-client privilege. It's for educational uses only. So please bear that in mind. This is just a little bit of my background, though. Some of you may know this. I don't talk about it every presentation, but I'm the former executive director of Partnership for Connected Illinois. So I had a hands-on look at the way a prior broadband stimulus program rolled out, because at the Partnership for Connected Illinois, we worked with broadband providers in the state of Illinois on grants as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, as well as digital literacy grants, digital training grants. And of course, we were the entity responsible for mapping and planning broadband within the state of Illinois. My legal practice today consists of working with fiber and fixed wireless providers on these topics that you see here right now. And there's my legal bio at my law firm. You're welcome to go if you have questions and or are interested in legal services. My presentation here, I'm going to focus on the Emergency Broadband Benefit. We'll also talk during this discussion about the Emergency Connectivity Fund, and there's kind of breaking news, flashing news that I'll mention when we get to that in terms of the timeliness of it. But the EBB is the first of these programs up, and so in this session we'll focus on EBB and ECF. So EBB actually came from legislation passed during the Trump administration, the prior administration, tail end at least, December 27th of last year, $3.2 billion benefit. And it's something that had been discussed as part of the various stimulus efforts in last spring, when there were several, in growing orders of magnitude, numbers of relief for people affected by the pandemic. One of the ideas that people have been talking about was subsidization for broadband connections beyond the rather limited $10 a month connectivity that is available through Lifeline. This emergency broadband benefit supplements that significantly. So $50 per month available to those homes, $50 per month to the provider for the individual subscribers that meet the criteria. That's the eligible low-income households, and that number is higher, $75 a month for those living on tribal lands. Okay, gotta press the continue button. The funds are distributed, as I just mentioned, through participating broadband providers, who then grant the discounted internet access to the qualifying households that apply. There's also an equipment reimbursement option through the Emergency Broadband Benefit for up to $100. And I should add, and we have this on the page for this event on Broadband Breakfast, we have a link to a prior discussion that we had as part of our regular Broadband Breakfast Live Online on March 10th, so almost 2 months ago, with a number of officials in the broadband space, including a Federal Communications Commission official. She talked about the process as it was then underway to roll out the Emergency Broadband Benefit. Lots of good information from that session, so kind of point you back to that for some of that information as it was emerging. So the process had literally just opened 2 days before. That is to say, the application process for broadband providers that want to offer this benefit, and it is still ongoing. There's not a deadline for you, if you are a broadband provider, to apply to this, although there was a kind of a window just for prior approval, so you could be on the same track as an eligible telecommunications carrier. Let me back up. I'm one of those who always says, define your terms so So I'm looking, I didn't define this term yet, so I will define it in this next slide here. And that is to say, an eligible telecommunications carrier. Again, not super obscure, but not everyone may know what that means. What is an ETC, an eligible telecommunications carrier? An ETC is a telephone provider or a broadband provider that wants to offer benefit services, and it's a requirement if you offer telecommunication services. Now, again, and we'll talk about this next week on net neutrality, broadband is not at this moment a telecommunication service. It is separate and apart from telecommunication services. So you don't need to have ETC status to be a broadband provider, period. But if you want to offer certain benefits, such as applying for the reverse auction, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, you needed to be on track to become an ETC. Now, for this program, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, you don't even need to get on track to be an ETC. That's one path if you are an ETC, but if you're not an ETC, you can go one of two ways. You can, if you offered some of the COVID benefits, that is to say from the CARES Act, one of these first stimulus measures last year, if you offered services under that, you could be automatically approved for the EBB. If you're neither of those, neither an ETC nor offered CARES Act funds, there's another process. It's not super onerous. There are some, glitches, hiccups, but this is called it's actually called the expedited program. Here's the key though. You have to have offered broadband on December 1st, 2020. That's the key requirement for a broadband provider being able to offer the Emergency Broadband Benefit. Moving to the next slide here. These individuals, these companies that are not ETCs that want to receive the benefit, you need to go to the FCC to apply. And that's where this automatic approval comes in if you offered services, part of the CARES Act, or an expedited application. That's the process I've just been talking about. You just need to show you offered broadband on December 1st, 2020, and meet a couple other modest eligibility requirements. 2/3 way through the presentation, we'll soon open up to the next topic. And again, thanks for your patience on this one. I know everyone's watching on Zoom. I will post the replay on the site later on, but we're not having that glitch right now. All right, so the providers who offer the EBB need to have provided broadband on December 1st. This is how broadband is defined in the regulations, and there's no minimum speed requirements. So there's been a lot of discussion. We've had a lot of that discussion about speeds, about whether the speed thresholds are raising, lowering. For this program, there's no minimum speed other than broadband, which is by definition 25 megabits down, 3 megabits per second up. And mobile broadband connections are also seen as qualifying. Okay, so now once the provider is eligible, then you need to make sure that the customer or consumer is eligible. So there's 5 requirements here. They either previously met the qualifications for Lifeline participation, or they received benefits under free and reduced price lunch program, or they experienced a substantial loss of income as a result of the pandemic with some documentation or otherwise being verifiable, or they received a Pell Grant for the current year, or if you, the service provider, speaking to you, I mean, I know there's people who are not service providers, and we welcome you on this, and I'm not saying that there's nothing of relevance to talk about, but if a service provider had an existing low-income program, that customer qualified under it. So any of those 5 qualifications qualifies a consumer. And part of the reason for this process to get, basically, it's called EBB program status, is that then the benefits are administered through USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company. And that administration is the agency that will be interacting with the broadband provider for the dispersal of benefits. Just a couple more quick notes here. It wasn't required to even offer simple standalone service. You could offer bundled service and still get the benefit. And group housing, multiple dwelling unit service is allowed. FCC agreed to include households that receive service as part of a bulk billing arrangements where the households are not directly billed by the ISP, but pay a monthly fee for broadband services to their landlord. Okay, so just again, MDUs can participate in this program too. So last substantive slide here, there's really the process of getting an FRN, a FCC registration number, registering with called sam.gov, the System for Award Management. That's the government system for paying contractors. The application process, again, this is for those who are not ETCs, is through that link there, and you need to submit the states or territories in which you offer EBB program services. You need to seek the approval to offer EBB, which again is the thing you do to get permission, and then some certifications and documentations. I do see a couple questions here. Last slide is just my contact information, which is available on the website. So William King asks, can ISPs still apply to be a provider under the EBB program, or should we apply for Lifeline funding? I hope I've addressed that in my comments thus far. You do not need to apply for the Lifeline funding, although, raise an interesting question I haven't got the complete answer to on, the pros and cons of also going through the Lifeline process. But I guess the key difference here, I'm going to go ahead and unshare my screen here. The key difference here is that because of this expedited process, makes it easy process, EBB applications are easier than prior Lifeline applications. Now, I also got a question here. It's a private question, so I won't say the name, but the question says, T-Mobile says they only do selective states for the older Lifeline program. What is the best method to voice to the FCC of this major carrier denial? Good question. I don't know the answer. So I think that, it's certainly worth communicating to the FCC about this. This is a program where the benefit is passed through broadband providers who offer or already offered broadband service. So I guess if you're trying to get the benefit and your provider is not saying that they offer it, then that raises a good question that's worth bringing to the attention of the FCC. Open to more questions, hit the chat window, or if you'd like to ask it on camera, that's fine too. I would ask you to send me a quick, chat through the message that you'd like to, and I'll go ahead and, unmute you and turn you on video camera. So that's kind of what I had to say about the EBB, the Emergency Broadband Benefit aspect. Let me move over, and I don't have as much because there wasn't as much until last Friday when the FCC released a draft order for the Emergency Connectivity Fund. This is, again, a draft report and order, and it came out Friday, April 30th, and it's been circulated for consideration. I checked this so I'd have this detail down. The FCC's monthly meeting this month is on May, we're in May, is on May 20th, okay? And yet the law, the American Rescue Plan Act that was passed, and from which this $7.1 billion Emergency Connectivity Fund benefit flows, required the FCC to act within 60 days or by May 10th. That's 5 days from now. So, so the FCC is going to act likely on what they call circulation, but maybe they'll do something I haven't heard of yet. Likely approve this and release it and say it's done by May 10th. The the agency releases these draft orders generally 3 weeks before an open meeting. They did release it within 3 weeks of their open meeting, but they have to act on it beforehand. So they basically put an expedited framework on this. They've said you can reply, give what's called an ex parte comment by May 5th. That's today at 6 p.m. Eastern time. That's all in the footnotes to this draft order that has come out. But anyway, I'm just highlighting this to say this benefit is going to be approved in almost all certainty within 5 days. Now, what does the benefit include? That's kind of the larger issue. The Emergency Connectivity Fund is more of a fund. You can think of it as E-rate, right? It's a major supplement to the E-rate program. And the Emergency Connectivity Fund allows schools and libraries during the emergency to use these funds for students and staff and library patrons during the duration of the COVID emergency, and that period will be up to 1 year after the Health and Human Services Secretary declares an end to the pandemic. The Emergency Connectivity Fund covers costs associated with equipment and services, and otherwise includes many new rules and supplements to the existing E-rate program. So, for example, the FCC summarizes how the order sets performance goals and metrics to measure the Commission's and USAC's success and in administering this Emergency Connectivity Fund. It again just channels a lot of these resources through the existing program that E-rate is governed by. Just that it's more funds available than were previously being available. I want to again turn to you all, open it up. We got another question here privately from I won't say who is having good success on sharing the emergency broadband program info, and how? What best practices are there on sharing this info? So I'm going to ask that person to just elaborate on that a little bit more. What do you mean by success on sharing? Do you mean to say success in performing the program after being awarded, or do you mean in a more limited sense success in getting awarded and getting the program going? That's kind of my follow-up for you. There's a lot of people, including ourselves at Broadband Breakfast and through other venues, who have been talking and showcasing and helping people to get questions addressed on the Emergency Broadband Benefit and now on the Emergency Connectivity Fund. So if you clarified that question, hopefully be able to address it. Go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and let you ask the question here. Just introduce yourself and say a word or two about yourself, Mark.
Yes, good afternoon, Drew. My name is Mark. I'm here on the behalf of the Western North Carolina Broadband Project, and the EBB seems to be a significant benefit. My question around the delivery of this program, it's unclear. Our Regional Council of Governments has sent an email, but if the recipient population doesn't have technology to receive an email and isn't part of the threading, what are effective community delivery tools for folks to share this information?
Okay, so you're basically saying, what are good programs that have been successful in getting the word out, right, about the Emergency Broadband Benefit? It's a great question. I don't have a clear or even a specific answer on that. I mean, you're raising, of course, the paradox. We've long been talking about this paradox where, we're going to map broadband. Well, how do you or speed test broadband? How do you do that for people who aren't on broadband, right? And you're trying to get the benefit to help people get connected. I I don't have a good answer for you, but you've suggested a great topic for us to look at. And I mean, there's no limitations per se on the ability to share information, to publish it, promote it, and I'm sure, and we certainly hope to have organizations from digital inclusion groups, and we have had people on digital inclusion groups. For example, we've had folks from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance on our program before to talk about how the pandemic has really prompted a greater demand for services and communicating around broadband projects. And so they and many others are particularly busy at this time to help do exactly that, like you're suggesting. So hopefully that provides a little bit of thought and context there. Any other questions that you have, Mark, about emergency broadband benefit? Do you want to tell everyone who's watching a little bit about some of the ways you're approaching this topic?
So the Western North Carolina Broadband Project is affiliated with the University of North Carolina Asheville Foundation. And one of the methods we're hoping to cultivate is to work with some of the community college and university instructors to find students that may be eligible for federal funding to work. And this would be one of the projects that we would assign to a group of students. This is still very much in an early development phase, but we're trying to figure out leveraging the community assets. And here in Asheville, North Carolina, it does include the University of North Carolina, Asheville, as well as a couple community colleges. Western Carolina University is another member of our advisory team as well.
No, thank you very much, Mark. And I do note that Lindsay Stern has shared in the chat window a link to the FCC's Emergency Broadband Benefit Outreach Toolkit, okay? And that's in the chat window for those of you. And we'll post that on this page and by the way, it suddenly worked. I don't know why it didn't launch immediately. It suddenly worked on all of our platforms. So for those of you who are watching outside of Zoom, we welcome you, and we note that we will put this link that's been provided by Lindsay Stern up on the site. So it's an outreach toolkit that the FCC has designed. That's again kind of the thing. I mean, it's best to have the people administering the program. We have had the folks from FCC on the program to talk about EBB. We'll probably invite them back to talk about Emergency Connectivity Fund now that these rules have been finalized. We've got another point here from Bruce Wolf. He says to send kids home with a notice for their parents, distribute to places of worship, community services, snail mail, door-to-door canvassing. All good suggestions. Thank you for offering those, Bruce. It is great to see. I mean, again, in some ways, this fund is coming much later than originally needed. Right? That it was so necessary a year ago. It continues to be necessary. But it's good that it's out here. Doreen has raised her hand, and I appreciate that. Thank you for raising your hand. Would you like to join? Please go ahead.
Hi, so my name's Doreen Cornwell, and I do digital equity projects in Seattle. As far as how to do outreach and how to reach the communities that are underserved, I guess I have a couple of suggestions. One is to check with like your local low-income housing authority or housing providers, because that's a population that's probably highly likely to be eligible. Seattle, in the Seattle area, we have I think we're really lucky in that the Seattle Office of IT has done a really, I think, vigorous job for quite a while of developing connections with different community-based organizations. And I think that one of the things that's positive about the FCC Toolkit is that it's available in several different languages. So those are just ideas to start with. Talk to your housing authorities and then see what the network of community-based organizations is. And, some of the students might actually already have some connections. So that's my 2 cents. And I meant to be on camera, but I'm not. So
Okay, I appreciate your coming on and sharing your thoughts there. May I ask you a follow-up, Doreen? What ways have you seen entities like the digital inclusion efforts in Seattle as you're speaking? What ways have you seen them kind of rise to the challenge about addressing particular needs that have come up owing to the
Owing to the
COVID pandemic?
That's a good question. There's a big pool of tech volunteers, of course, because Seattle's a very tech area, and there's been huge efforts, for example, to get some level of connectivity and devices into the hands of families because of virtual school. I wish I had good numbers, but I know that there's been a very big effort about that. The public libraries are all closed, but there's options a little bit for, Wi-Fi from outside. I'm not quite sure. Oh, and then there's a whole digital equity learning network where different organizations get together and talk about what do we mean by digital equity, what are the skills people need to learn. And so there's like a big partnership with Goodwill and but there's a bunch of different community-based organizations throughout Seattle and King County. I can probably look up some more detail and maybe email it to you, Drew.
Well, wonderful, and thank you
Or
very much.
I can post my email in the chat too.
Okay, great, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Again, we appreciate people joining and raising your hands to speak. This is something new we're trying. As I say, normally we have an interview, a panel session. That's what we've been doing. We've been doing this for 13 months now, every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. We have done Q&As with individual broadband champions in the past. And what we're doing for this month, the month of May, is these Ask Us Anything sessions, with today being on the Emergency Broadband Benefit and the Emergency Connectivity Fund. So we're open for more questions, and I do see a couple of points that have come through, but we'd be happy to take more. Just for those who've joined just recently in the last couple of minutes, we have noted that the Emergency Connectivity Fund, the second of these two programs, which is larger, 7.1 billion. The rules have been released 5 days ago, and they will be must be acted on by 5 days from now on May 10th. That's what the FCC is planning to do. This, of course, raises huge questions about what happens when the funds run out for both the Emergency Broadband Benefit and the Emergency Connectivity Fund. This is a huge boost, $10 billion plus boost to the normal annual, recurring expenses of more than $10 billion a month for all of the USF, Universal Service Fund programs. The four major programs being, of course, the so-called high-cost program. That's the program that distributes funds to provide connectivity to rural areas. And that's gone through a lot of changes in recent years with the implementation of the Connect America Fund auction and the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction, the first phase of which took place last October and is kind of still in the implementation phase as awardees who bid and received successful reverse auction winnings as they start to get their funds and deploy RDOF, rural digital broadband. That's one component of the Universal Service Fund. Another second component is the one we spent most of our time here today talking about, Lifeline, the program for low income. Used to be just for phone service. About 4 or 5 years ago, it was expanded to broadband. And now with the Emergency Broadband Benefit, that's again a $3.2 billion supplement to the Lifeline program for how long? The duration of the pandemic, or until funds are exhausted, which is likely to come first, just by the note of people involved in the programs. The other two USF funds are the E-rate, okay? And that's what we've talked about briefly here on the Emergency Connectivity Fund. Continue to see your questions, and I do see a question here I'll take in just a second. And then the fourth aspect of the Universal Service Fund is the rural healthcare program, a much smaller aspect. And actually, I haven't checked on the details of that and how it's changed, if at all, through the COVID pandemic. So if anyone knows, feel free to put that through the chat window. Okay, so Bruce has asked another question here. We still get back to the last mile connectivity issues. There are some efforts like with Mobile Beacon for nonprofits through TechSoup to provide very inexpensive hotspots on the cellular networks. Also, there are amateur radio operators starting disaster wireless mesh networks that can easily be accessed, like San Francisco Wireless Emergency Mesh. Well, thank you for those comments. And if let's kind of do it this way. If you'd like to speak on camera, go ahead and hit the raise your hand button. That'll be my cue to be prepared for you coming on, and you're welcome to if you'd like to supplement this. Again, this is just us, the participants in this session on Zoom, and those who are watching our other audiences, and we're ask us anything is kind of our mantra today. So ask us anything about the Emergency Broadband Benefit or the Emergency Connectivity Fund. I see a comment from Brett Glass. Brett, thanks for being here again. Not one of these programs has been successful. Okay, strong opinion there. All have been wasteful and subject to scams. CAF in particular has overbuilt existing networks instead of covering new areas. Well, let me address that, and I will let you come on camera in just a second, Brett. The first, and thank you, I love Bruce's comment to expand acronyms, and I always like to do that. CAF, I mentioned earlier, is the Connect America Fund, okay? So you got to think of Connect America Fund and the new acronym RDOF for Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. That line is basically the old high cost program, okay? So in this comment here, Brett is taking aim at those programs, and that's well and good, Brad, and we can talk about that. But I'd probably prefer to focus, if you believe this, focus your criticism on the problems with Lifeline and the problem with E-rate, because that's what we're talking about here today. We're talking about the Emergency Broadband Benefit, which is like Lifeline extended, and the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is like E-rate extended. So Brett, go ahead and turn your camera on, and let's hear you say if you'd like to say anything further on this. Okay, you're on mute though, so unmute yourself too, please.
Here I am. Am I live?
You're live, and we can hear you and see you. Okay,
well, I will talk specifically to EBB and Lifeline and the programs currently under discussion. I am a small rural WISP, and well, my attempts to sign up to the EBB program have just been an incredible exercise in struggling with bureaucracy. I had to sign up with something called sam.gov, which in turn required me to sign up with something called login.gov. And then I had to work through getting through an account with Dun & Bradstreet, which questioned the existence of my business, even though it's been around for 30 years. Then USAC questioned my credentials because I wasn't a telephone company. And then did things like sending me spreadsheets with forms to fill out, but the spreadsheets were read-only, so I couldn't do that. It was just an amazing level of bureaucracy, and it parallels, unfortunately, the bureaucracy that we saw in BIP and BTOP and E-rate, whose funds mostly went only to the large carriers. It raised their prices so that school districts and other supposed beneficiaries of that got nothing. What I want to know is, why don't we just cut right to the chase here? Why don't we give the subsidies as vouchers directly to people who are verified to need them, and let them spend those vouchers competitively with the carriers of their choice? And if they don't like them, of course, they can go ahead and spend the next voucher with someone else. Why don't we let the market to help with this, instead of constantly being scammed, constantly having waste and overbuilding and fraud?
Well, Brett, you're actually speaking to my heart right now, because I actually am a huge fan of vouchers in many contexts, and I totally see the logic in vouchers for Lifeline, as you've discussed. And I know this is an idea that has been around before the pandemic, certainly, right? And that is to say that instead of kind of going through an entity, you give it to the individuals and then let them choose. I mean, just sort of speculating a bit, the concern has probably been, well, how are you going to make sure they're going to spend it on the intended program? And you're setting up a new level of bureaucracy to supervise that. But in general, I'm very, very supportive of that idea. And particularly for Lifeline, that makes a lot of sense. Not that it's a bad idea for the others too. It's just that that's an area that it's definitely been talked about. Let me say one more point, Brett, to what you started off with. And the issues you've raised are not unusual. Many other wireless internet service providers have had similar issues and challenges. And it is a trick sometimes navigating those. You have identified several of the steps, and we've mentioned some of those that you need to go through in order to be qualified. But it shouldn't be too onerous. Be happy to help you, Brett. So talk to me offline if that would be of use to you. Okay. We have got another question here. Thank you. Here, this is from Bruce Wolf again. And thanks last week. You were on our program last week and you had so many good thoughts here. Bruce Wolf asks, our organization has many federal grants, agrees that the cumbersomeness of applications that requires frequently a full-time staffer, plus they change the online intake sometimes annually to a new process flow. Again, you're speaking to the choir, at least to this choir here, which is to say, we've got a lot of bureaucratic issues in complying with the Universal Service Fund and on the distribution side, let alone on the payment side. So that is, you're speaking to the choir. Maybe we'll have to invite some officials from the government on to talk specifically about that. Now, Doreen, do you have another comment that you'd like to make? Happy to have you back here. I just was unclear whether you meant to come on camera or not. But Doreen Cornwall, we'll go ahead and invite you to come back on if you're listening here.
Hi, Drew. Somehow Zoom is telling me it's not letting me turn on my camera, but what I was going to put in the chat, I have a little bit of concern about what happens when the money runs out and people are signed up for a plan. There we go. People are signed up for a plan and then their $50 a month subsidy goes away. I'm a little bit skeptical about how sustainable that is, and I'm wondering if there's anybody else who's got the same concern.
Yes, let me address that, and I again welcome others to comment on that. And I'm going to give a little bit of inside baseball that hopefully maybe explains why this might be a reasonable interpretation. So the Universal Service Fund is an annual fund, and it has payments going in and payments going out. And both the payments going in and the payments going out are administered by the Universal Service Administrative Company, USAC, which is technically a non-profit private entity, but it's actually a subsidiary of another non-profit private entity, NECA, the National, I can't remember the E, Carrier Association, an older organization. USAC, even though it's a separate private group, kind of is accountable, so to speak, except it is accountable to the Federal Communications Commission, and decisions made by USAC are reviewable by the Federal Communications Commission Wireline Bureau and then by the full FCC. So USAC is kind of the tax collector and the benefit payer of Universal Service Fund benefits. Now, we've been talking, of course, about the benefit side, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, the Emergency Connectivity Fund. We touched upon Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, right? Those are payments out of the Universal Service Fund that USAC is making to those entities that have applied for and gotten approved through their system. Well, there's a whole nother process too, and that is the payment side, okay? And this is payments on or assessments on telecommunication services, not broadband, okay? So when I pay my broadband bill for fiber optic service connected to my home, gigabit symmetrical service, I don't pay a dime or a penny of taxation on that or assessment, right? When I pay my provider, it goes to my provider. There's not a separate line on there, okay? Whereas your cell phone bill, right, if you look at that, or other telecommunications services bills will have lines for USAC. And right now, the assessment is more than 33% of the payments that are telecommunication services. You have to pay more than 33% more. Now, normally the telecommunications provider simply adds that on to the bill and says, okay, you owed $1, now you owe $1.33. This, as I hope people can see, 33% fee or tax is very high, not sustainable, and there's lots of pressure. And there's two main pressure points, or I should say two major release valves for this pressure right now. One of those is a push by many organizations to expand the base for contributions for USF. Instead of just being telecommunication service, broadband, according to these proposals, would also be assessed and have to pay a fee into the Universal Service Fund. That's one sort of option being discussed and considered. A second one is to start to pay Universal Service Fund amounts out of the general revenue of the United States government. Again, right now, what the USAC pays out is only what USAC takes in. So they can't pay more than they receive. And so the Universal Service Fund is in a way limited by what, well, again, it's kind of a weird thing because the amount of the fee is determined after they determine how much they're going to spend. So it's kind of the opposite, right? Oh, we'll spend, and then we decide how much we're going to raise in fees or taxes on top of that. So that's why what I've just described, Doreen, hopefully gets to your point. We've now opened up the spigots considerably more for the payments of these benefits. And we've effectively doubled, if you will, the size of the benefits being paid. And so unless there's one of those two or something else, you're going to see a lot of reaction to a cutback of those benefits when and if it happens. So Doreen, you want to weigh in again? Please just unmute yourself here. Okay.
No, I was just turning on my camera to nod. Thank you. This is helpful information.
Okay, glad to provide. We've gotten some more comments in here. Brett has added a point about earlier comment about amateur radio, and he mentions that the FCC ripped away spectrum that ham radio operators were using for an emergency broadband mesh network to give to the cellular companies. So thanks for that point. Not exactly on point for our discussion, but we'll keep that in mind, and maybe we can have another discussion on another Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern on that topic. I've also got a private question here about, it's called ISP to Community Anchor Institution Synergies and how it relates to minimizing waste, fraud, and abuse, especially for the Emergency Connectivity Fund dollars. Well, that's a great point. And if the questioner would like to speak to that, I'd love to hear that questioner talk about it. But let me just talk a little bit in the absence of more questions about the community anchor institutions. So addressing this point, what is a community anchor institution? A community anchor institution is a school or a hospital or a library, a civic center, community center. It's a pretty expansive definition. I'm not aware of a section of the federal code that that defines community anchor institutions. But community anchor institutions, there's a lot of people and organizations that work to promote them. One of them who we've actually worked with in the past is called the Schools, Health, and Library Broadband Association, or Shelby, as we affectionately call it. So that group of community anchor institutions kind of obviously lives and breathes E-rate, because E-rate is a fund that provides for schools and libraries. And as I mentioned earlier, the Rural Healthcare Program is also part of the Universal Service Fund. That they are all entities that receive funding and have rules that govern the dispersal of those funding under the Universal Service Fund. So the ISP to community anchor institution question is kind of an issue of how they can work together, have synergies, minimize waste, fraud, and abuse. And there's there's, again, a lot of state action. We've had state broadband initiative individuals on this program. We had a great program in late March with five different state broadband initiative individuals, and they talked about some of the broadband programs going on in their states. And so that's again, I think it's a great development over the last 10, 12 years, development I've been involved in Illinois through the state broadband initiative at that time. And now it's evolved and progressed. And most states now, almost all, have a state broadband office. And these broadband offices can play a really important coordinative role with community anchor institutions, with public-private partnerships, perhaps also through anchor institutions. Brett is interjecting another note here, and I see his hand raised. So let me just read his question, then we'll hopefully invite him to address. The problem with reliance upon anchor institutions as anchor tenants for broadband is that the carriers which connect to them often have little interest in serving the surrounding community. Well, that is a wonderful point, Brett. You've taken your hand off, so okay, come on and tell us a little more about your thought, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this point here.
Yes. Well, Drew, here in Wyoming, there was great interest in bringing broadband to communities by setting up a state network in which large telecom carriers were contracted to bring in connections to schools and other institutions. And what happened was that, yes, those large carriers got the contracts and brought in the connections to the schools and large institutions, but did not make them available to the rest of the community. Sometimes the rest of the community couldn't get good, or at least cost-effective broadband, even if they were a block from the school, and there were not effective requirements that they do so. There weren't even requirements that if they didn't want to do it, that they wholesale to other providers, such as a WISP or some other local provider. As a result, the anchor tenant philosophy kind of backfired. What it did was it gave away the largest contracts in the community to these large carriers, which then actually prevented other carriers from coming in and serving the community because the big customer was gone.
Well, I am agreeing with you 100% on this point, Brett, and it's given me motivated to two action items and comments that I'd like to make. The first is, this is actually a great topic that we should raise with people like Shelby, the Schools Health and Library Broadband Coalition, and others, because I agree that it'd be very important to have a change where those who are connecting, provide that kind of last mile backhaul or opportunities for that connectivity. I know how important that is through working with individual projects, fiber and wireless projects in different states, to be able to get that access to that last mile wholesale access. The second point I want to say, and this kind of goes back to the experience with the Recovery Act, that was one of the features of the funds under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, is that if you received the funds, the infrastructure funds, you had to allow access, open access, if you will, wholesale access to those broadband connection points to others who wanted to get access to them. So I guess I just point that out because these are ideas. Obviously, there's infrastructure legislation being discussed in a major way. We've had sessions on this. We'll have more sessions in the future, I'm sure. But I just wanted to kind of have those two action items to say. One is to, let's figure out a way to make this issue forefront in the minds of the anchor institutions. And secondly is how it should be forefront in the minds of legislators. Lots more questions coming in here. From JJ McGrath, there is a movement for an anchor institution to take their connection and turn around to distribute it out to the community and work with a local internet provider to build out a network. That's kind of an elaboration on what I was just saying. JJ, excellent point. Love to talk with you offline more about this. And when you say there's a movement, in fact, we still have a few more minutes. So if you want to come on and talk about that, JJ, we'd love to have you there too. I'm also getting a couple private comments about transparency and accountability from state actors is key. Again, there's many reasons for cynicism about our political processes, including prior instances of waste in the Universal Service Fund. So it's actually very timely and important to ensure that past examples of I don't know. I mean, we're not afraid. We'd love to talk about these, report about these. We report on Broadband Breakfast about issues in broadband. Our motto is better broadband, better lives. We want to make sure we get higher capacity networks and we get people using them. Okay, so Brett is elaborating here that those anchor institutions should not themselves become ISPs. That's not their business, and real life experience has shown they're not good at it. We need them to be customers. JJ McGrath has put his or her, I apologize for not knowing, into the chat window for everyone to speak to this issue. This has been a wonderful example. I mean, we still have a few more minutes, so if someone else has a comment or wants to go on camera, Brett, I see your hand up. I don't know if you put it up or taken it down. I'll give you one more word in this topic. Okay, she's taking it off. So if anyone else would like to chime in, we got just a few more minutes to do so. And in my mind, I appreciate almost all of you sticking with us for this discussion. This was the first of what we'll be doing for next week. We'll be talking about net neutrality. So not a debate per se, but we're going to hear points of view. We're going to hear discussion points. I'll probably do the same thing like I did at the top of this hour, talk a little bit about the history, some of the current issues in this debate over what is called by many things now net neutrality or open internet, transparency rules. We'll be dissecting the issue basically and what it means from a policy level for broadband policy and internet technology. The week following, we'll be talking about spectrum and spectrum sharing. The week following that, on the 26th of May, we're going to be talking about Section 230, which is kind of ever present in the social media tech discussion space because of the way people have begun associating it with politicization of content. Doesn't necessarily address that, no, doesn't. But there's a lot of discussion about Section 230. And in fact, again, not Section 230 per se, but just today, the Oversight Board, an entity created by Facebook to provide some kind of quasi-judicial review of decisions about content moderation. They basically said, okay, Donald Trump is not going to go back on Facebook, but they, quote, remanded it back to Facebook to give a little more clarity on why. So I haven't read the decision yet. I'm just going off reporting that I saw in broadbandbreakfast.com. Invite you to continue to follow us, to share with your colleagues, friends, information about our event. As I've said, we will be back again next week for another Ask Us Anything. Final thing I will say is we did post a quick video about this event. We'll do that for the other the other three events on the site. So feel free, as always, to email with any questions, thoughts, or suggestions for future events. With that, I will go ahead and thank each of you for being with us, and we will see you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care.